My name is Margaret Miller. I'm 71 years old, and for 45 of those years, my world was a universe ordered by the Dewey Decimal System. I was a librarian. Not a glamorous profession, I know. It was a life of quiet whispers, of the gentle rustle of turning pages, of the faint, sweet, vanilla-like scent of old paper. My greatest joys were small, precise things: a perfectly balanced budget for the acquisitions department, a rare first edition found at a dusty estate sale, the look on a child's face when they found a book that opened a new world to them. My life was a story of order, of quiet service, of the deeply held belief that the greatest treasures were not made of gold, but of knowledge and stories, carefully preserved and freely shared. My own story, however, has been one of constant, uncatalogued withdrawals, a life savings of selfhood spent on my 2 children, Michael and Sarah. My late husband, John, was a good man, a high school history teacher with a passion for his subject and a paycheck that was as modest as his temperament. We never had much, but we had enough. We had a small, neat house, a garden full of tomatoes, and a deep, abiding love for each other and for the children we raised. We taught them the values we lived by: hard work, honesty, and the quiet dignity of a life lived within one's means. They learned the lessons, but they never, it seems, believed in them for themselves. My sacrifice, the great, slow, and almost imperceptible emptying of my own life's ledger, began after John passed away. I was left with a small but secure pension, the paid-off house, and a lifetime of carefully accumulated savings. It was supposed to be my time to travel, to take the art history courses I had always dreamed of, to live a small, quiet, and interesting life for myself. But my children had other plans for my future. Michael, my son, has his father's charm but none of his quiet contentment. He is a man who has always been in love with the idea of success, but deeply allergic to the hard, tedious work required to achieve it. His life has been a series of brilliant startups, each one launched with a slick presentation and my seed money, and each one collapsing within a year, leaving behind a trail of debt and a new, even more brilliant, idea. I funded his artisanal coffee roasting venture, which ended when he discovered roasting coffee involved getting up before noon. I funded his luxury dog walking app, which ended when he realized it involved picking up poop. Each failure was followed by a visit to me, his face a mask of wounded, entrepreneurial pride, his hand held out for another investment. And I, the foolish, loving mother, would write another check, draining my savings, telling myself I was funding his dream, not his delusion. Sarah, my daughter, is a different kind of expensive. She married a man with a good smile and a mountain of debt, and she is consumed with the desperate, all-consuming project of appearing wealthy. Her life is a carefully curated performance of a social status she has not earned. The greatest performance was her wedding. It was a lavish, breathtakingly expensive affair, a fairy tale she had torn from the pages of a magazine. She wanted a Vera Wang dress, a 7-course meal, an orchestra. I, the quiet librarian, was expected to provide the budget for this grand production. To pay for it, I had to take out a reverse mortgage on my home, the home John and I had worked our entire lives to own free and clear. I was borrowing against my own past to finance her fantasy of a future. My life shrank. My dreams of Florence were replaced by frantic, tearful phone calls about their credit card debt. My plans for a quiet retirement were replaced by my new, unpaid, full-time job, being the unpaid nanny to their children, the silent, ever-reliable ATM for their endless, self-inflicted financial crises. I did it because I loved them. I did it because they were my children, the only tangible pieces of my beloved John left in the world. I was the librarian of their lives, and my only job, I believed, was to ensure their stories had a happy ending, no matter the cost to my own. I did not realize they had already decided on the final chapter of my story. A quiet, convenient, and preferably inexpensive ending. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday. A cold, gray, unforgiving Tuesday in November. The words the doctor used were clinical, precise, and utterly devastating. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. Aggressive. He spoke of treatments, of chemotherapy, of palliative care. But I, a woman who had spent a lifetime reading between the lines, understood the subtext. He was not presenting me with a plan for a cure. He was giving me the Dewey Decimal Classification for my own death. I walked out of that sterile white office into a world that had suddenly, irrevocably, lost its color. The familiar streets of my town looked alien. The faces of strangers looked like masks. I felt a profound and terrifying sense of aloneness. The one thing I wanted, the one thing I needed, was my children. I needed their arms around me. I needed their strength. I needed them to tell me I was not alone. I went home. I sat in my quiet living room, the doctor's pamphlet, with its cheerful pastel-colored illustrations of the digestive system lying on the coffee table like a ticking bomb. And I made the calls. Michael was the first. He answered on the third ring, his voice impatient, distracted. "Mom, hey, I'm in the middle of something. Can I call you back?" "No, Michael," I said, my voice a thin, unsteady thing. I need to talk to you. I've just come from the doctor." I told him. I said the words, the ugly, terrifying words. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. Chemotherapy. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Not a warm, empathetic silence. It was a cold, calculating silence. The silence of a man whose computer has just crashed in the middle of an important project. "Oh," he said finally. "Wow. Mom.A. That's terrible news. Just terrible." His voice was a recording, a script of the appropriate emotional response. There was no real feeling behind it. My first treatment is on Friday," I whispered. I don't know if I can drive myself home." Another pause. A longer one this time. I could hear him breathing. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard in the background. He was still working. "Friday," he said, his voice now full of a weary, put-upon sigh. "God, Mom, that's the worst possible day. We have the big pitch meeting for the new app on Friday. It's an all-day thing. I can't miss it. This could be the one. I see," I said, the words a puff of cold air. "Look," he said, his voice brightening with a solution. "Call an Uber, or one of those medical transport services. I'll even pay for it. Just send me the bill. I've got to run. We'll talk next week, okay? Stay positive." And he hung up. I sat there, the phone still pressed to my ear, the dial tone, a mocking, empty sound. He would pay for it. He would add it to my tab. My hands were trembling as I dialed Sarah's number. She answered with a cheerful sing-song. "Hi, Mom." I told her. I said the words again. And I was met with a different, but equally devastating, kind of cruelty. "Oh my God," she gasped, and her shock, at least, sounded genuine. But it was the shock of a person whose vacation plans have just been threatened. "Pancreatic cancer? Oh, Mommy, that's awful." And then, the inevitable but. "Friday? This Friday? Oh my God." Tom and I are leaving for Aspen on Thursday. For a whole week. It's a ski trip we've had planned for months. All the tickets are booked. The hotel is non-refundable. I can't cancel, Mom. The kids would be heartbroken. Aspen, a ski trip, while her mother was about to begin a war for her own life. "I understand," I whispered, though I did not. "Look," she said, her voice full of a bright false cheerfulness. "You're strong. You'll be fine for a week. We'll be back before you know it. We'll call you every day from the slopes. Just try to rest. We'll be thinking of you." She too hung up. I placed the phone back in its cradle. And in the profound, absolute silence of my small, neat house, I began to understand. My children were not coming. My diagnosis was not a family tragedy to them. It was a logistical problem. An inconvenient, poorly timed, and slightly expensive distraction from their own, more important, lives. They did not vanish with a bang. They vanished with a series of polite, reasonable, and utterly soul-crushing excuses. They vanished into the busy, important worlds I had sacrificed my own life to help them build. The days that followed were a blur of a new kind of loneliness. I went to my first chemotherapy treatment alone. I sat in the cold, sterile infusion room, a needle in my arm, surrounded by other patients who were all flanked by loving, worried family members. They held hands. They shared blankets. They spoke in low, comforting tones. And I sat alone, a ghost in a sea of love, reading a book. The physical sickness was terrible. The nausea, the fatigue, the metallic taste in my mouth. But the sickness in my soul was worse. The utter, absolute certainty that I was completely and irrevocably alone in the world. I had given my children everything. My time, my money, my health, my dreams. And in my hour of greatest need, they had given me nothing. Not a phone call. Not a visit. Only a profound and deafening silence. They had not just abandoned me. They had forgotten me. They were waiting, I realized with a clarity that was as cold and as sharp as a scalpel, for the librarian to be finally, quietly, and permanently deaccessioned. The weeks that followed were a descent into a quiet, beige purgatory. My life, once so ordered and full, shrank to the four walls of my small, neat house. The world outside, the world of my children's busy, important lives, ceased to exist. They did not call from the ski slopes of Aspen. They did not check in after the big pitch meeting. The silence from their end was absolute, a testament to their complete and total disengagement from the messy, inconvenient business of my dying. My life became a brutal, lonely routine, a schedule governed by the tyranny of my own failing body. There was the chemo, a bi-weekly appointment with the cold drip of the IV and the metallic taste of poison that was supposed to save me. I would take an Uber there and back, a quiet, anonymous old woman in a headscarf, watching other families rally around their loved ones, a silent observer of a love I no longer possessed. After the treatments, there were the days of sickness, of a nausea so profound it felt like it was dissolving my very bones, of a fatigue so complete that the simple act of lifting a teacup felt like a Herculean effort. In those long, silent hours, alone with my pain and my fear, something inside me began to change. The heartbroken mother, the woman who had wept for the loss of her children's love, began to fade. Grief, I discovered, is a finite resource. You can only cry so many tears before the well runs dry. And in its place, something else began to grow. Something colder, harder, and infinitely more resilient. It was a quiet, unshakable resolve. I was a librarian. My life had been spent in the service of stories, and I began to see my own life, my own story, with a librarian's dispassionate eye. The story of the endlessly giving, sacrificial mother. It was a bad story. It was poorly plotted, with a weak, passive protagonist and two deeply unsympathetic antagonists. It was a story with a sad, pathetic, and deeply unsatisfying ending. And I, in the final chapter of my own life, decided I wanted to write a different one. The turning point, the plot twist I could never have imagined, arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 2 months after my diagnosis. It came in the form of a phone call. I was lying on the sofa, weak and nauseous from a chemo session the day before, when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. I assumed it was a telemarketer. But something, some flicker of old habit, made me reach for it. "Is this Margaret Miller?" a man's voice asked. It was a dry, professional, unfamiliar voice. "Yes," I said, my own voice a weak croak. "Mrs. Miller," the man continued, "my name is Arthur Davenport. I am an attorney in Portland, Oregon. I am the executor of the estate of the late Mr. Alistair Finch. Does that name mean anything to you?" Alistair. My brother. My strange, reclusive, and long-estranged older brother. He was a brilliant, eccentric artist, a man who had cut himself off from the family 50 years ago to live a solitary life in the wilds of Oregon. I had not seen him in person since our mother's funeral. We exchanged a brief, awkward Christmas card each year, nothing more. I had always assumed, from his silence and his determined isolation, that he was a starving artist, a man who had chosen his art over the comforts of the world. "Yes," I said, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. He was my brother, is he?" "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, Mrs. Miller," the lawyer said, his voice softening with a professional sympathy. "Mr. Finch passed away 2 weeks ago, peacefully, in his sleep." A wave of a strange, distant sadness washed over me. The loss of a brother I barely knew, but who was, nonetheless, the last living link to my own childhood. "I am the executor of his will," Mr. Davenport continued. "And you, Mrs. Miller, are his sole, named beneficiary." I was silent. I assumed this meant I was to inherit his dusty cabin, his collection of unsold paintings, and perhaps a mountain of debt. "Mrs. Miller?" the lawyer asked after a moment. "Are you still there?" "Yes," I whispered. "I'm here." "Good," he said. "Because the estate is rather substantial. It seems your brother, under a pseudonym, was one of the most successful and sought-after landscape painters of the last half-century. His work sold for enormous sums to private collectors. He lived a very frugal life, and he invested his money with a rather remarkable degree of skill. I still did not understand. "Mrs. Miller," the lawyer said, his voice now taking on a slow, deliberate weight, as if preparing me for an impact. "To put it plainly, your brother's estate, after all taxes and fees, is valued at approximately $33 million. And it is all, every last penny of it, yours." $33 million. Inshallah. The number did not compute. It was a figure from another universe, a number from a book about dragons and kings. I, Margaret Miller, the quiet librarian, the woman who had spent her life pinching pennies and worrying about the electricity bill, was a millionaire. 33 times over. I began to laugh. It was not a happy sound. It was a wild, unhinged, and slightly hysterical sound, the sound of a woman whose entire reality has just been shattered and reassembled into a new, bizarre, and utterly unrecognizable shape. The lawyer, to his credit, remained calm. "Mrs. Miller," he said gently, "perhaps you should sit down." I was already lying down. When the shock began to recede, it was replaced by a feeling I had not felt in a very, very long time. It was a feeling of power, a feeling of profound, beautiful, and absolute freedom. My first thought was not of my children. My first thought was of myself. My story, the one with the sad, pathetic ending, had just been given a new, astonishing, and deeply ironic final chapter. My second thought was of the cancer, the disease that was slowly, painfully, eating me alive. I had been fighting it with the blunt, brutal, and publicly funded instruments of the local oncology ward. Now, I could fight it with the best weapons money could buy. The decision was not even a decision. It was an instinct. The instinct of a librarian who has just been given access to the rarest, most valuable archives in the world. I would use my new resources to save the most precious collection of all, my own life. I did not tell my children. The thought, in fact, never even crossed my mind. They had written me out of their stories. I would now, simply and quietly, write them out of mine. My silence, the silence they had imposed on me, would now become my greatest weapon. My new life began with a series of phone calls, but these were not the weak, pleading calls of a needy mother. They were the crisp, decisive, and authoritative calls of a woman in command. My first call was to Mr. Davenport, the lawyer in Oregon. I instructed him to liquidate a portion of the estate immediately and to wire the funds to a new private bank account I had opened in my name only. My second call was to the most renowned pancreatic cancer specialist in the country, a man whose groundbreaking experimental treatments were spoken of in hushed, hopeful tones in the chemo ward. His waiting list was years long. I was on a plane to his private clinic in California the next day. My new world was one of quiet, efficient, and breathtakingly expensive competence. I was no longer a number in a crowded, understaffed hospital. I was a client. I had a private room that looked like a suite at the Four Seasons, with a view of the Pacific Ocean. I had a team of doctors, of nutritionists, of physical therapists. The brutal, one-size-fits-all chemotherapy was replaced by a targeted, state-of-the-art immunotherapy, a treatment that was both more powerful and infinitely gentler. And as my body, under the care of the best medicine money could buy, began to heal, my soul began to heal with it. The fog of fatigue and nausea began to lift, and with it, the fog of a lifetime of self-neglect. I began to get stronger. I began to walk on the beach. I began to eat again, the food prepared by a private chef, delicious, nourishing meals that reminded my body of the simple joy of being alive. I spent the next 3 months in that quiet, sun-drenched sanctuary, engaged in the twin projects of saving my own life and building a new one. I did not just focus on my health. I focused on my future. I hired a sharp, young financial advisor, a woman who specialized in managing the assets of women of a certain age. Together, we began to construct a new story for my $33 million. My silent revenge was not a plot to harm my children. It was a plot to build a life so beautiful, so full, so utterly, completely independent of them, that their absence would become an irrelevance. I bought a house. A beautiful, light-filled, modern house on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, not far from the clinic. I hired an interior designer. I, who had lived my entire life in a world of sensible second-hand furniture, found a deep, surprising joy in choosing the perfect sofa, the perfect piece of art. I bought a car, a beautiful, safe, and utterly reliable silver Volvo, and I began to build a new family. A chosen family. The nurses at the clinic, the doctors, my financial advisor, the young gay couple who owned the bookstore in town that day. I began to host small, quiet dinner parties on my new terrace. My life, which had been so small and so silent, began to fill with the sound of laughter, of intelligent conversation, of genuine, human connection. I did not contact my children. I did not answer their perfunctory, once-a-month text messages. I simply vanished from their lives just as they had vanished from mine. I knew, a problem they assumed was quietly and cheaply solving itself in a small house 3,000 miles away. The news of my miraculous inheritance, when it finally broke, was not orchestrated by me. It was, as is so often the case, the result of a single bored journalist, a reporter for a national financial magazine, intrigued by the story of the reclusive, unknown artist and the massive, mysterious estate he had left behind, did some digging. He found the will. He found my name. And he found me. The article was published online on a Friday. It was titled, "The Librarian's Millions: How a Retired Civil Servant Inherited a Secret Art Fortune." It was accompanied by a picture of my new, beautiful house on the cliffs. I knew, the moment I saw it, that the silence was over. The story was out, and the children, my long-lost, busy, and suddenly very, very interested children, were coming. The final act of my new, rewritten life was about to begin. The article, once published, spread through the internet with the speed of a digital wildfire. The Librarian's Millions. It was a fairy tale, a modern-day Cinderella story, and the world, it seemed, was enchanted. My quiet, private life was, for a brief, strange moment, the subject of national fascination. I knew they would have seen it. Michael, with his obsession with tech and business news, and Sarah, with her insatiable appetite for stories of wealth and lifestyle, would have had the stories served up to them on their phones by a dozen different algorithms. The first call came less than 24 hours after the article was published. It was Michael. I was sitting on my terrace, watching the sun set over the Pacific, a cashmere blanket over my legs. The caller ID flashed with his name. For a moment, my heart gave a small, painful, vestigial throb. Then, I took a deep breath of the cool, salty air, and I answered. "Hello, Michael," I said, my voice calm, pleasant, and utterly unrecognizable from the weak, reedy voice he had last heard. "Mom?" he said, his voice a strange, choked sound, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a desperate, cloying sweetness. "Oh my God, Mom, is that you? You sound so good." "I am good, Michael," I said. "Very good. We saw an article," he stammered. We had no idea. We've been so worried. We thought you were still dying?" I offered, my voice still gentle. "No, as it turns out, the best medical care in the world is a rather effective antidote to dying." There was a frantic, desperate energy in his voice now. "We're coming, Mom. We're getting on the first flight tomorrow. Sarah, the kids, me, we're coming to see you, to take care of you. We should never have left you alone, shouldn't you?" I asked. The question as soft and as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. They arrived the next afternoon. They did not take an Uber. They took a taxi, a large, ostentatious SUV, and they had it wait in the driveway of my new, beautiful home, the engine running, a clear signal that they intended this to be a triumphant and permanent return. I did not greet them at the door. I had my new housekeeper, a kind, no-nonsense woman named Maria, show them into the living room. I made them wait. I let them sit there, in the middle of my new, expensive, and utterly unfamiliar world, for a full 15 minutes. I watched them on the security camera feed on my tablet. I saw them gaping at the art on the walls, at the view of the ocean, their faces a grotesque mixture of awe, envy, and a raw, naked greed. Finally, I made my entrance. I did not look like the woman they had abandoned. The months of good food, of rest, of the best medical care, had transformed me. The gray, sickly pallor was gone, replaced by a healthy glow. My hair, which had been falling out from the chemo, had started to grow back, a soft, silver halo. I was not wearing my usual sensible librarian's cardigan. I was wearing a simple, elegant, and breathtakingly expensive cashmere lounge set. I looked healthy. I looked serene. And most terrifyingly of all for them, I looked rich. They jumped to their feet as I entered. And then the performance began. Sarah was the first to rush forward, her arms outstretched, her face arranged in a mask of tearful, loving concern. "Mommy!" she cried, the diminutive a weapon of false intimacy she had not used in 30 years. "Oh, Mommy, you're alive. We were so worried." Michael was right behind her, his own eyes welling up with perfectly rehearsed tears. "We're so sorry, Mom," he said, his voice thick with a counterfeit emotion. "We should have been here. We were so lost." They tried to hug me. I took a small, deliberate step back. It was not a dramatic gesture, but it was a clear one. A boundary. A new, impenetrable wall. "Sit down," I said, my voice quiet, but with an authority they had never heard from me before. I gestured to the white linen sofa. They sat, a little too quickly, like chastened children. I did not sit. I stood. I was the one in command of this room. "Let's dispense with the theater, shall we?" I said, my voice still soft, but the steel beneath it was now unmistakable. "You were not worried. You were not lost. You were busy. You had a ski trip. You had a pitch meeting. My impending death was an inconvenience. My survival and my subsequent inheritance is a complication you have now rushed here to manage." They started to protest, a chorus of "No, Mom, that's not true." But I held up a hand, and they fell silent. "I am going to tell you a story," I said. "The story of the last 4 months of my life." And I told them. I told them about the lonely Uber rides to the chemo ward. I told them about the nights spent alone, sick and terrified. I told them about the phone call from the lawyer, about the money, about the new doctors, about the new house. I told the story in a calm, flat, and utterly dispassionate voice, the voice of a librarian reading a particularly sad, but ultimately unremarkable. When I finished, they were silent. Their fake tears had dried. Their faces were pale. They had no script for this. "But we're your children," Sarah finally whispered, her voice a thin, reedy sound of disbelief. "The money, it's family money. It's for us, for your grandchildren." And that was the moment. The final, clarifying, and deeply satisfying moment of truth. "The money," I said, my voice as clear and as cold as the glass of water on the table beside me, "is my money. It is the legacy of a brother I barely knew, who showed me more kindness in his death than my own children showed me in my hour of greatest need. And I have already decided what to do with it." I walked over to a small, elegant desk in the corner of the room. On it sat a single, leather-bound document and a pen. It was the final formal paperwork for my new will and testament, prepared by my new, very expensive team of lawyers. "You see," I said, picking up the pen, "my illness, my recovery, it has given me a new perspective, a new purpose. I have discovered that the greatest joy that wealth can bring is not in what you keep, but in what you give away, especially to those who are truly in need." I did not look at them. I looked out the window, at the vast, beautiful, and endless ocean. "I have decided to leave my entire estate," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound, joyful clarity, "all $33 million of it, to a new foundation I have created." I could feel their eyes on me, wide with a dawning, sickening horror. "It will be called the Alastair Finch Foundation for Compassionate Care," I said. "It will provide funding to small, independent hospices and palliative care facilities. It will help to ensure that people in the final chapter of their own stories are not left to face their journey alone. It will provide them with the dignity, the comfort, and the companionship that every human being deserves." I paused, and then delivered the final, devastating, and beautifully ironic blow. "I am, in fact, naming the oncology wing of my old hospital back home as the first beneficiary. Your children, my grandchildren, will grow up in a town where the very building that symbolizes my lonely suffering will now bear a plaque with my name on it, a testament to the generosity of a stranger." And then, in the dead, profound silence of that beautiful, sun-drenched room, in front of my two healthy, greedy, and suddenly very, very poor children, I signed the document. My signature was not the shaky scrawl of a sick old woman. It was the firm, clear, and elegant script of a woman who was, for the very first time in her life, the author of her own story. The collapse was complete. Their last, desperate hope had just been signed away to a charity for the dying. And I had never felt more alive. My old life ended the moment I signed my name. My new life, the one I was writing for myself, began in the silence that followed. There was no grand, dramatic exit. There was only the quiet, pathetic, and deeply satisfying spectacle of their utter defeat. They did not shout. They did not argue. They were broken. They were two ghosts at a feast they had just discovered they were not invited to. They stumbled out of my house, out of my life, without another word. The sound of the waiting taxi's engine, a final, humiliating punctuation mark on their failed expedition. I did not watch them go. I turned back to the window, to the ocean, to the future. My life now is not quiet, but it is peaceful. It is filled with a new kind of purpose, a purpose that is not directed at two ungrateful children, but at hundreds of strangers I will never meet. The Alastair Finch Foundation has become the central project of my life. I am not a passive benefactor. I am an active, engaged chairwoman. My days are filled with meetings, with site visits, with the deeply rewarding work of using my brother's legacy and my own second chance at life to create pockets of comfort and dignity in the world. My cancer is in remission. The doctors, with their quiet, scientific optimism, tell me I have years. Years I intend to fill. Not with travel, not with luxury, but with this. With work. With purpose. The librarian in me has found her final, greatest collection to curate. A collection of small kindnesses, of quiet dignities for those at the end of their own stories. I never heard from Michael or Sarah again. Their story is no longer my concern. They are characters from a book I have long since finished reading and returned to the shelf. This evening, I am sitting on my terrace. The ocean is a vast, calm, and endless expanse of blue. On the table beside me is a stack of letters. They are thank you notes. One from a small hospice in rural Montana, thanking the foundation for the new comfortable beds we funded. Another, from a palliative care nurse in Chicago, thanking us for the grant that allowed her to hire more staff. I read the letters, and I feel a sense of peace, a sense of rightness that no amount of familial obligation ever gave me. I spent a lifetime in the quiet service of my own family, a family that, in the end, saw me as nothing more than a line item in their budget, a problem to be managed. They waited for my story to end. They did not realize that it was just the beginning of a much better, much more important one. I learned, in the crucible of my own fear and loneliness, a profound and liberating truth. A family is not a bond of blood, but a bond of love. And love is not a duty. It is a choice. My children made their choice. And then, with the help of a kind, dead, and unexpectedly rich stranger, I was finally, gloriously, free to make mine. And I have chosen well.